For those of you watching the replay, we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. We've just started the live broadcast here, just a second early, so for those people logging in, they can get connected. We'll just give everybody just a few minutes to log in. Okay, some of you are starting to tune in live. Welcome. We're about 2 minutes out from beginning today's webinar. We're going to be covering a lot of different topics on what you need to know so that you can prepare your images for online sharing. We'll be addressing tools that are readily available to you, like Photoshop and Lightroom. I'll be showing some plugins to talk about sharpening techniques for the web, and then we'll also take a look at some new web technology for sharing your images online. So we are about 1 minute away from starting. You also may notice that if you're on the Google Plus page, there is a Q&A button. You can easily post questions there, so feel free if you want to test that out and add a question to today, and along the way you can ask questions. We also have Walter Pollard and Tom Kennedy here who will do their best to try to address your questions. Welcome, Alan. Thanks for your check-in and the question there. So at least one person found the Q&A box, so that's good. It means it's working. So. Good. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you. We are going to be tackling a topic here, but before I begin, I'd like to turn things over to ASMP's Tom Kennedy, who's going to say just a few words about ASMP and what we're going to try to accomplish today. So, Tom, go right ahead.
All right. Thanks, Rich. I really appreciate it. As many of you know, ASMP is very, very committed to giving you the opportunity to get educational materials that are valuable to you and experiences that help you put your best foot forward creatively and with respect to business operations. And Rich and I began talking about a lot of different things back at the Strictly Business Conference 3 in 2011, and we've been following up with each other periodically over the years. Rich is an ASMP member and very active with our organization. And in particular, we've been talking recently about the need to revitalize the ASMP website and to make it more useful to our members who are seeking to have strong relationships with clients and present their work in the most effective way. So our recent conversations have revolved around a technology that Rich will be showing you later on today called Piqsure that we're going to be deploying on the website to help present images in a variety of different areas of the website that we'll be hopefully launching next week. And in particular, we also were going to be making this technology available later this year for use by members who will be able to have free Piqsure accounts to present their work. So I think that it was important to put this out now because, as I said, our website is launching shortly, and I think you'll see the difference in the way that our images are presented as a result. So, Rich, let me turn it back over to you and take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. So we're going to be covering a variety of things today. We're going to make sure that you know how to use all of your features, saving your images so they look their best online. Want to make sure that you're comfortable with all those things. So I think you'll find this truly useful. I'm going to just mute Tom and Walter, but they're going to be in the chat pod and happy to answer any of your questions there as you have them. So we're going to cover a wide range of topics. Let me just start to share my screen, and I'll give you sort of the agenda for today, and then we'll jump right into software and start showing you things that you can do. So let me share that, and hopefully you are seeing some slides at this point. And here we go. So my name is Rich Harrington. I'm a visual storyteller, and I've been working with photography and video for many years of my life. I actually started out as a journalist, and that's where I first fell in love with the power of visual communications. Through the years, I've written about 40 books on a wide range of topics, mostly in the space of photography, Photoshop, DSLR video, After Effects, Premiere Pro, Final Cut, things of that nature. I am an ASMP member. I also speak at conferences. I have my own small business, and I'm a partner in a company called Piqsure, which I'm going to show you a little bit at the end of our presentation. It's a new way of showing high-quality photography online. I think you'll like it. Our objectives today is we're going to take a variety of topics. I'm going to make sure you understand how to sharpen, which is something that has become a bit of a lost art for a lot of folks. And sharpening your images for the screen is different than sharpening for print. So we'll talk about those issues. We'll also talk about some of the things we can do here for making sure all of our images are ready. So we'll address a wide range of things here for removing color cast, exposure issues, things like that. And we'll size images for the web. We'll balance out the file size. So I'll show you different ways of optimizing your images for the web. And we'll use services like Find a Photographer to help you get those images out there. And then I'll show you a Piqsure. Very briefly, my background has been in both print and video. I found myself working equally as a photographer, a film and video editor through the years, a journalist, and a podcaster. I immensely enjoy getting to travel and take photographs now as part of my job. So I'm fortunate that I get to travel the world and tell stories and help people learn about photography as part of my job. But I also do a lot of client work and have to capture images for clients as we travel the world, which has been great. I do a lot of work in the nonprofit space, helping nonprofit organizations tell their story and really convey their messages through things like public service announcements. So that's my background, and hopefully this will all make sense. If I seem familiar, it might be because I'm on your bookshelf, or you've seen some of my courses on Kelby Training or lynda.com or YouTube, and through the years I've gotten a decent hold on technology. So let's go ahead and switch here into Photoshop to begin, and what I'm going to do is start to walk you through some of these techniques. We're going to use a combination of Photoshop and also use Lightroom, so you see both of these here. And what I want to start off with is sizing images for the screen. So let's do a raw process here, and I'm just going to open up a raw photo to start. Here we go, and we'll take something here. A sunset photo will work. There we go. And I'm just going to dial that in real quick. Nice dusty desert day. And there's a handful of things I want you to make sure you know about when you're opening a raw file. One of those is right down here at the bottom if you're using Photoshop, and this is where you have options about how that image opens. And there's some important things here. For example, I need to make sure that this image is going to open into the sRGB color space. It's currently opening into Pro Photo, which is a great working space, but at the end, I'm going to need to convert to sRGB. If you know all along that you're intending to go out to the web and you're specifically getting this image optimized for an online portfolio, then I would consider working in sRGB all along, so what you see is what you get. If you want to compromise, you can use Adobe RGB, which is a more common working space for Photoshop, and that's going to be very similar to the final sRGB output. But ProPhoto, a color space that a lot of people use in Lightroom, is going to give you tremendous color shifting when you go to the web. So I recommend avoiding it if you're going to be doing a web-specific workflow. It saves you a little bit of a step. Now, as I get ready to open here, you'll see that you have the option of controlling what happens with the image. So you could decide to scale or down convert here. I'm a big fan of avoiding that until the very end. So I'll simply open things up, but I will set my resolution to 72 or 96. This isn't going to change the resolution of the image, but it's going to help you better understand the approximate size when you're working with an on-screen display. You will notice here an important option, though, that most people blow past, and that is Sharpen for. So there's different types of sharpening, including sharpening specifically for the screen that's built right into Camera Raw. And most people either have that option turned off or set for print, and in this case, we're talking about an online portfolio. Now, if you want to sharpen for your traditional print portfolio, then of course set that to glossy or matte paper. One other thing I suggest is the open in Photoshop as a smart object, so you can get back to the raw file if needed. All right, that looks pretty good. We're going to deal with sharpening more in just a moment, but let me open up that object to start. It's going to hand that object off into Photoshop and bring that ready in. You'll notice that at any point in time, if I double-click on that, it'll reopen Adobe Camera Raw, which means that I can dial in my settings. If I change my mind and want to use a bit of a gradient from top to bottom there, just to create a little bit more shift in the sky, I can do that. And when I click OK, the Photoshop layer updates. So you've never really done anything destructive here, which is a great workflow if you're in Photoshop. When you're ready to save, you are going to have two options depending upon the version of Photoshop that you're using. If you're using an older version of Photoshop, you'll have Save for Web. If you're using a newer version, you'll still have Save for Web. It'll just say Legacy. Now, Legacy is code for saying that something is old and outdated. It's also code for saying we give up and telling you not to use it because those of you who already know how to use Save for Web don't like change. So you can use either one here. Save for Web I like actually better than the newer one still. And it's probably because I'm old and a dinosaur, but when you invoke Save for Web, what's going to come up is you'll see a preview side by side of the change. Now, there are a bunch of different formats when you go to Save for Web. I'm just going to break them down really quick. Rarely will we use PNG. This is a larger format that's great for graphics that need transparency, but not very useful for photos because the file size gets a lot bigger and it's not much more useful than a JPEG. We will use the PNG a little later when we make our signature watermark, and I'll talk about that in just a second. GIF is evil as far as photos are concerned. It's a very low quality format at 8-bit color, so you really only have 256 possible colors to convey your photograph. So it really comes down to JPEG, and you'll see with JPEG that you have different qualities here. Now, JPEG High is going to be great for most services. A little later, we're going to talk about Piqsure, and we recommend going with JPEG quality 100 or 80, somewhere between 80 and 100, so that you have a higher quality image. But this is one of the easiest ways to manipulate the file size if you're concerned about upload times or download times. Let's resize the image here temporarily. I'm going to optimize this for display on a typical web page. So I'll type in a width of 1200 pixels and press the Tab key, and you'll see that the image quickly adjusts. On the left, you're seeing the original image, and on the right, you're seeing the resized image. One of the things that people often miss are a couple of options here. Now, I recommend that we take the zoom level at 100%. You're going to want to really sort of explore those details there as you're looking at the graphic so you can see what's happening. And so there I punched it at 200%. Useful to see noise and change. And one thing that I'd put out there is while it's tempting, avoid decimals here. So I'm going to get a better resize if I go with 50% or 25% rather than 26.04%. That's one of those situations where sometimes you're better off going with a better mathematical size and then cropping to a canvas size afterwards. But that's ultimately up to you. Now, that did the resize. It works pretty well. And one of the things that people miss is right here at the bottom, you have a preview that tells you the download time. So if you want to go back in time to your 9600 baud modem, this picture would have taken about 6 minutes to download. But fortunately, there's not a lot of those out there this day. So if you're looking at your typical LTE, cell phone, or home internet connection, you're seeing that we're getting these larger images download times flitting around 3 to 5 seconds. And so this gives you an idea of how long it's going to take to download. But 5 seconds is still a pretty long time if you want to deliver this high quality image. Now, we'll talk about streaming images later with Piqsure, but if I wanted to get this a little lower, you'd be surprised at how much you save by dropping this from 100 quality to 80 quality, which is still very high. It went from a 6-second download down to a 2-second download. So visually, no change between very high and maximum that you should be able to see with the naked eye. The gradients in the sky here still hold up well, but we just cut our download times down from 6 seconds to 2 seconds, which is a huge savings in time. So that's something to think about. If you want, you have the ability to kick this over to a web browser. So you can edit this list, add your favorite web browser to it. Let's just navigate here, and I'll go to my applications, and you can choose a particular application that you want to use. And if you do that, that'll make it easy to add other utilities in. Now this is taking a second to load because, of course, there we go. When you do a live presentation, nothing is ever perfect, but let's grab Google Chrome, and I'll click Open, and that's going to add that to that list. And so now, very easily, I can just click to preview that image, and it sends it over to Google Chrome, opens it up, and simulates it in the web browser. Now this is an important step because if you have color profiles attached to your image and you didn't do the sRGB conversion, this preview is where you're going to see that the image went to hell before it hits the internet. So by previewing it in a web browser, you're going to pick up on any potential problems from the resize or the color space change. So I highly recommend this part of the dialog. All right, let me just flip back over here to the webinar window and see if there's any questions that have popped up yet. Let me stop the screen sharing for just a second. And again, feel free to use that Q&A pod if you do have questions. Looks like we're doing okay, so I'm going to jump back in and share some more images. I'm hoping that that's just my microphone that's crackling a little bit, or my headphones and not my mic. Are we hearing crackling in the my voice at all, or is it clean? I'll let somebody comment. All right, well, nobody's commenting, so I'm going to assume that you can hear my voice clearly. Walter, let me know if that's not the case, okay? Just unmute your microphone and let me know. All right, let's share the entire screen. Does it sound okay? Good.
Sounds fine.
Okay, thanks. I just have a bad earpiece, apparently. Let's hit cancel here, and let's size one more image in Photoshop, and then we'll do the same thing in Lightroom. So I'll choose open here, and let's grab another photo that's going to have some detail in it. And this is where you have to be careful with those fine details as you start to process the image. Now, one of the things that I always recommend is make sure that you're not clipping the image. If you click here, you can see clipping, and this highlight clipping is going to be useful. Now this is really for print, but it lets you know that there's no ink coverage. And if you start to see clipping there, it indicates that in this case, the red channel, it's overblown. Now, most of you aren't going to have highlight clipping, but where you're going to see that more likely is in the shadows. So everybody these days loves their clarity. They start popping that up because basically it's instant sex on a slider. And we can put a little bit of color in there, and as we start to get richer, maybe we drop the black point a little bit. Well, all of a sudden, I'm being warned that my black is clipping. This means that I've hit pure zero black, in this case in the blue channel. You can toggle that on and off there. And that warning is useful because it's going to let you know that if you were to print that image or publish it to the web, your colors would be crushed. And ultimately, especially as they move through the internet and mobile devices, your color is going to go really flat. So I always say to be mindful there. Let's quickly crop here. And one thing that a lot of folks miss is that you have the ability to crop to specific sizes or shapes. So in this case with the crop tool, I did a 1-to-1, cropping for a service like Instagram or Facebook, which is becoming more popular. If you're doing a banner image, a lot of times you're going to have shapes like 9:16 or 16:9. And this could be useful there as you crop. And what you'll see is that it will crop, or you can start to rotate that or snap it into place so that you can make your targeted banner images. Now, as I do this, very common for the web, under the FX tab, I'll tend to darken the edges a little bit so that the edge of the screen doesn't go bright. Again, though, you see the clipping there, so it's something to be mindful of. I also strongly recommend, and we'll talk about sharpening more in a second, that you do sharpen for the screen. drag the amount slider up, and then holding down the Option or the Alt key, drag the mask slider. This allows you to see what's being sharpened. So what you want to do is get it so that you're not sharpening the large flat areas. And there's no reason for me to sharpen the sky. That's just going to add noise to the image, which when you compress it to a JPEG will increase the file size, add aberrations to the image, and lower the overall quality. So you need to adjust that mask so it's better defined. In this case, I'm sharpening just the boat. And then I can play with details and the radius. And holding down that Option key, you see there it makes it really easy to judge what's happening because it narrows your focus. And that image is now much sharper. Now what I like here that a lot of people miss is you've got these compares here. So you can see a before and after side by side as you work, which is quite useful. Or you can see a split. And that just gives you a split right down the middle of the before and after so you can judge things, which looks pretty good. Everything is set there. And by the way, if you are ready to go, you can bypass opening in Photoshop altogether and just click Save right there and go right to the JPEG file and decide your quality. I recommend 8 to 9, which works pretty well, and spit the image out. Of course, make sure you target that sRGB working space when you're going out to the web. Extremely important. All right, I'm going to switch on over to Lightroom and do some of the same things there, unless there's any major questions here. So let me just quickly check if anybody's posted any big questions. And I think we're a little good there. So, all right, let's switch over to Lightroom. And I'll go right into here to an image. I've got some photos of eagles from Alaska. And these have already been moderately developed already. But again, I'd like to talk about the sharpening step. So let's jump in there. And when you sharpen, it's pretty important that you go into 100%. So I recommend punching in so you can judge the effects of what's happening. And this is one of those type of subjects where fast-moving, beautiful bird, it's hard to get a sharp image. But under the Develop module here, I'll go into the Sharpen area. Let's just take a look. And we'll use Details. And holding down that Option key, you can drag the slider, just like Photoshop, to refine the mask. This allows you to get more targeted on just the edges, and then you can more safely crank up the amount and the radius to get much more aggressive with your sharpening. And that's going to do a great job of bringing out some of that detail. Now, you can do similar with noise reduction. Holding down the Option or the Alt key as you drag in there is going to help you see the noise as you clean it up, but that works pretty well. We'll talk about lens corrections more in a moment. The only other thing I'd like to put out there is the HSL adjustment, which a lot of folks miss. This allows you to grab one of these tools. So, for example, I can click on Luminance here, come over here to the blue water, and just pull down, and it moves the correct sliders. Remember, when we darken an image, that part of the image gets more saturated. So I'm going to back the saturation slightly off on the water, but bump it up on the body of the bird. For me, when I'm saving images for an online portfolio, it's very important to me that we know where we're looking. Let's desaturate the eagle's head there to get rid of the gold cast. We'll talk more about color cast later, but this targeted adjustment tool makes it really easy to pull some of that extra color out of the white areas that I didn't want. That's looking pretty good. We'll grab Luminance and just darken the body down just a little, and that's looking great. Now, what I like here is that this makes it much easier to get the job done. And so there we are. I'll just crop a little tighter here for the web. Smaller devices often warrant seeing a tighter composition. There we go. But I do want to leave a little bit of that reflection in there. There we go. I like that. And return. And it updates. So those are some of the things that I would do to enhance the image before saving. And you'll notice there that zooming in to 100% is a good idea. Now, you can use your quick keys of plus and minus to dial in a little bit of an exposure adjustment if needed. That's looking pretty good there. And what I'm going to do now is invoke the save. So File, you'll find Export with Preset. And this is where you can create things. How do you want to export? Now I have a lot of presets here, and we'll talk about that in a second. Or you could just choose Export with the ellipses. This will make it easy for you to dial in what you want to export. So I would recommend making your own set or user presets. Choose what you want to export. So I'll add one here called Portfolio. There we go. And I'll click Create. Now I'll choose what to make. So I'm not going to use any of the Athentech ones here, so I'll just turn that off. We're going to avoid using Athentech. So I'll export here to a hard drive. There we go. I can then say, where does that go? I'll choose it later so I can manually select it. I can tell it that I want to rename the file or have it prompt me to give it a custom name. I can go in here and adjust the settings, so JPEG, sRGB for the web, very important that you get out of Lightroom's native Pro Photo. And let's dial that quality into 80%. Now for Piqsure, I recommend 100%, but 80 is going to be good for other web services, so you don't have too large of a file. If you want to resize, this is where you can tell it to automatically resize images. This can be quite useful if you're going to be making a gallery for something like a WordPress website, where you want them to all have a certain width or a height. In this case, you can tell it to constrain the long edge and dial in a certain resolution. In this case, maybe 1200 pixels, which would work well. You do also have similar output sharpening. I would recommend choosing Output Sharpen for the screen. This is going to be on top of the sharpening you did, but a small amount, either standard or low, is going to help counteract some of the JPEG artifacts that you're likely to see if you don't invoke that sharpening. Another very important thing is the use of metadata. I strongly recommend including all of your metadata that you want with the image. Now, if you want to remove certain things from the image, you can make your own metadata templates inside of Lightroom, and this will decide what information is going to go. And this will then include it. Maybe you only want your copyright and contact information as a photographer, but you don't have an interest in sharing your camera settings or the location when you took the picture. This is up to you. And as we share more and more with online systems, I'm very wary of what information I put out there. Now with Piqsure later, I'll show you, we have full support for all of the watermarks, or sorry, all of the metadata. I'm looking at watermarks here. We can actually invoke watermarks, and let's talk about that for a second in Photoshop. I just want to check to see if there was any questions that popped up. So let me just flip on over. There are a few questions here, so let's see here. After masking and raising the detail and radius sliders, I noticed the quality is compromised. Keeping detail and radius to a minimum looks best. Why is that? Quality is not necessarily compromised. It's subjective. You need to be viewing things at 100%. So if you're not viewing things at 100%, then you're not getting an accurate judgment of what's happening. If you are viewing at 100% and it looks too much to you, then back it off. Okay? So that's ultimately up to you there, Terrence. And is there a benefit of Photoshop or Lightroom for the process? It's just a matter of personal taste. They both use the exact same raw engine. The real benefit is that you are using RAW. Now, I find that Photoshop gives me the benefit that I can more easily preview the image in a web browser before I commit. So that Save for Web dialog box is where I go when I'm really being specific. If I'm just banging out a bunch of images for a quick online client review, then Lightroom is fine. But if you think of this as the finishing touch where you want to do all the adjustments, you want to see exactly what it's going to look like in a web browser before you commit, then I strongly recommend the Save for Web dialog box in Photoshop because that's going to make it easier to have the ultimate control over your images. All right. Another thing that you might want to do is have a watermark on your images when you post them. We'll talk about sharpening here in just a moment, but let's make a tasteful watermark. And there's two ways of doing this. One method, you might have a vector logo for your company, maybe an Illustrator file, an EPS file. That's great. But in order to use it in Lightroom, you're going to need to convert that to a PNG file, the Portable Network Graphic, which is a web format with embedded transparency. If you are using a signature, that's fine too. So you're going to need, in order for that to work, you're going to need to use something that you scan in, or you can use an app like Adobe Capture to capture it and turn it into a brush. And let's open up both here. So I'll choose Open, and I'm going to grab the logo here, and I'll bring it in a little bit large. I'll click OK, and it opens up. So there's both of them. Let's start here. In this case, this is fine because there's embedded transparency. There is essentially everything that I need to use this as a watermark. Now, in this case, I'd likely put a little bit of a background behind there, and rather than have it be purely transparent, I'm going to fill that, Edit Fill, tell it to fill with white, but I'll drop that in at like 40% opacity. So there's just a little bit of a white background behind the logo. Now I can say File, Export, and in this case you can also use the newer Export As if you prefer. This is an alternative to Save for Web, and this is where you can do all the stuff. So we can size that down. We probably don't need a 2,000 pixel watermark. Something like a 400 pixel is probably going to be more than big enough. And I'll choose the PNG format with the transparency. That looks good. Convert it to sRGB and click Export. It'll bring up a dialog asking where you want it to go. Let's just put that in the same folder for now. There we go, Tasteful Watermark. And I'll call this RV Logo and click Export. And it's now saved. If we're going to work with a signature file, I would suggest that you take the easy route. First up, run a levels adjustment on your signature. Just press Command or Control L. And what you want to do is pop the blacks so they're nice and crisp, and pop the whites so there's none of the light gray from the paper or the scan. This will also work if you just take a photo of the signature, but you'll have to manipulate the levels just a little bit more. I'll click OK, and it updates. And now I can go over to the Channels command, and there's a channel here. If I simply duplicate this channel, there it is, and press Command-I to invert it, now I've got a cutout channel. I'll Command or Control-click on it, and it loads it as a selection. Now the signature's loaded. I could turn this one on and this back off, go over to Layers, and simply add a layer mask. And it cut it out from the background. It's nice and clean. Now, the challenge here with the watermark is that with my signature watermark, it's dark. So if I put it over a dark photo, it might disappear. This is why I'll typically have a dark signature and then apply a light stroke. Or you can go the opposite way, a white signature with a dark stroke. Just put a small stroke along the outside. You can even lower the opacity if you want. And now you've got the perfect transparent watermark. I could just say File, Export, and I'll export that again. Export as. PNG with transparency, that's great. We can make that a little smaller, do about 500 pixels wide. Click Export All. There we go. Brings up the dialog, and save the file, and it's stored. So now we have watermarks. Well, let's jump back into Lightroom for a second. You'll notice you have the ability to add a watermark right here in Lightroom. Now, I don't recommend the nasty, simple copyright watermark. Be a little more tasteful. So edit the watermark. You can now load that PNG file, which has the transparency. Just navigate to the folder where you saved it. Let's go with my signature in this case. I'll click Choose. It drops it in. It gives you a preview. Okay, so I've got that. It's a graphic. I'm happy with that. And now I could adjust it. So under here, I could adjust the size. And what's cool here is it's proportional. So rather than a set size, it's going to be in relation to the total size of the image. So even though you have different images, they can adjust the size. So I could say, well, go ahead and make that about 15% of the original image. We'll just type in 1.5 and adjust. Plus, I can move that. I can say, well, shift that in about 5%. There we go. And up about 5%, so it's not just slammed into the corner. There we go. And you'll notice that you have anchor points. So if you're not a lower left kind of person, you could be a lower right kind of person, and you could put this wherever you want. This makes it super easy. And I just recommend once you get that in there, that you save this as a new preset. So now I'll just name this RMH SIG LR for lower right and click Create. And I'll choose Done. Now that's an option here in my preset list. And if I needed to make another one with my company logo and another one for a particular client or a job, I can do that. And you have those watermarks. So now when you export, that image is going to include that in it. So let's just save that out. There we go. It's processing the file. You can track that right up there in Lightroom. And I'll just go ahead. There it is. Oh, JPEG Mini was turned on. I have to disable that, but that's fine. So I'll just go under File Export here and just bring that back up. There we go. And make sure that JPEG Mini is removed. There we go. And now I'm good. Export. Save it. And it invokes the file and writes it to disk. There we go. So that worked out quite well. And if we take a look at that, let's just go up one level, you'll see that it did write the file and it did put the watermark in there. And because my watermark has a contrasting edge, the problem with typical type-on pattern, where you have a dark signature or a dark logo over a dark background, is combated by the simple use of an outline. So that works really well there. And I now have a tasteful watermark on my image that's going to be consistently placed and ready to use. All right, let me check on some more questions, and then we're going to go into some things like balancing out the saving of the file size and talk about some common problems and lens correction issues that I recommend you fix. Once we're done with that, then we'll talk about Find a Photographer and Piqsure. So let's just take a look here. Is there a benefit to using Photoshop over Lightroom? We covered that one, so I think we're good. Looks like there's no more additional questions right now, so I'll keep going forward. But again, feel free to use that Q&A pod if you have them, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. All right, so let's go into Photoshop here and open up an image, and we'll talk about some problems. Let's take a look here, and I want to do one more round of sharpening. So you saw me sharpen with Camera Raw, and it worked. Camera Raw is great at sharpening images, and it absolutely does a good job. Now, again, here's that use of color clipping. I really recommend turning this on, because this will help you see when you're blowing out details in the image. And the thing to remember is lack of detail cannot be brought back later. So I find it's very important as I start to develop my raw file to do my best to avoid overall clipping. And if you have a little problem area like that, you can also use the adjustment brush. We'll just zero out the temperature and the tint here and all these other changes. And all I'll do with the adjustment brush is paint in slightly lower exposure, and you can paint over a problem area and then pull that down until it's gone. And that'll make it simpler. There we had a little white spot on the beak that was clipping. All right, that looks good. Let's take advantage of sharpening here in Camera Raw. Again, this is the exact same sharpening algorithm that you have in Lightroom. I'll increase the amount and radius here, so it's a little more aggressive. Zoom to 100% so I can better judge the effects. And then drag on the mask so that I'm not adding a lot of noise to the background. There we go. That's helping. While we're here, I would also encourage you to jump on over to the Lens tab. This is where you can remove things like chromatic aberration, which we actually had a little bit here at the fringe on the top of the bird's tufts. In high contrast areas where you often have backlight, you can see some of that problem. So that helps, and if you've got lens profiles, that could be useful to fix any transform issues. So let's open that there. We'll switch that from Pro Photo, make sure it opens into Adobe RGB in 16-bit, and I'll click Open. There it is. Looks good. And now I'm going to invoke another plugin. This one I'll show you two. Perfect Exposure is a free plugin from Athentech, and they have a details and shadow and a dehaze that's a nice adjustment on top of what Photoshop can do. And this plugin is totally free, so you can play with that and work with their depth, which is quite nice. They have a nice high contrast, and they have a beautiful light diffusion option, which softens the light. And that's a totally free plugin. I'm going to cancel that, though, and use their paid product called Perfectly Clear Complete. And in this case, what I'm going to do is punch up the detail a little more. So we'll zoom to 100%, Z for zoom. And I want to take a look at some of the feathers here in the noise. And I'm just going to be very gentle. So let's go here. I'll do a little bit there of the details in the shadow. I'm going to pull the exposure down. There we go. And a little additional sharpening with a little bit of noise correction. And it just puts a little bit of extra detail into the image, helping bring out some of those areas. There we go. And it's done. So easy enough. Sometimes I'll do a 3-pass sharpen, sharpen on opening, sharpen with camera raw, and sharpen with a filter. And that's up to you. If you have a non-raw file, remember, you can invoke camera raw as a filter and invoke sharpening that way in Photoshop as well. And of course, you can do everything I just showed you in Lightroom as well. Those plugins are available for Lightroom, and you have the same sharpening controls. So hopefully that helps you understand the need for sharpening to get a little bit of extra detail in there as you're working. All right, let's move forward. And in this case, I want to tackle a couple of issues. Let's do some stuff in Lightroom, since we've been in Photoshop for a while. And I'm going to switch over here back to the library. And I want to remove some small flaws in the image. Let's come here to Panos. There we go. And I'm just going to tackle a small panoramic image. So here we go. I'm going to merge this one together. This is a 5-shot pano in Lightroom. And I'll just say photo, photo merge, panorama. So what I did in this case was I shot 4 images of a big cavern, and I wanted to merge that together into a single shot. This is going to allow me to get a nice big image to use, and it's going to not be without problems. So that's not bad. Let's just fix the boundary a little bit there. There we go. I'll tell it to auto crop, and we'll merge that. Now, this makes a new DNG file. The lighting conditions in this particular place were extremely challenging. This is something where shooting HDR probably would have been beneficial, but I was handheld shooting and I didn't do bracketing. And after the fact here, we're going to develop this a bit, and I want to talk about some of the things to look out for. So we mentioned the HSL adjustments. That's going to be your biggest friend. Let me just show you those same adjustments we did in Photoshop and recap the quick fixes. So here's our merged DNG file. There we go. Let's just zoom out there so we see it. Not bad. Always recommend getting your white balance right. So if you have a color cast, you can roll the temperature or use the eyedropper. Feel free to turn on clipping warnings, just like we did in Photoshop, so I can see that. In this case, I see that the whites are clipping in the red channel. So I'll recover that in the raw file, so they're no longer clipping. I like a nice, rich image, so I'll pop the clarity a bit, but I see I'm starting to get some clipping there in the shadows. Now, that's up to you, but if you get too much of that, you're going to get a nasty image online, as well as print. So don't be overly aggressive there as you start to make those adjustments. All right, it's looking pretty good. A little bit of vibrance to fill that in. And let's finish that out with the HSL. This is where we can easily roll the hue. So if I feel in my mind's eye that that rock should be redder, I can get rid of the greenish cast. If I want the purples and turquoise here in this water that's been trapped for centuries to get richer, I could just drag with the saturation on image tool and pop that color, getting it nice and rich. If I feel like a section should be darker, I can just click, grab the On Image tool, and dial that down to get the sort of exposure that I want, color and channel at a time. So this is an easy way to get what you want. When you feel like you've nailed it, again, feel free to invoke this. Or what a lot of folks forget is it is a piece of cake to just then say Photo, Edit In, and kick that into Photoshop as a smart object. Now, everything you did in Lightroom is handed off to Photoshop. Photoshop's going to open that file up with zero problems and switch on over to Photoshop here. That image is going to get handed off. There it is. I can make any changes that I want. I can do things in Photoshop like add a color lookup table and toss on a film stock, such as a nice Fuji stock here, and play with different color processing techniques. That's a little strong, but I like the direction. Let's back that down. There we go. And I'm just going to put a little bit of a gradient on here. We'll pop in the gradient, and we're going to go from black to white. There we go. Let's reverse that. Put that in multiply mode. And now it's easy when you click on the gradient to just move that into place. There we go. That looks good. And I'll just lower that down a little bit to blend it. There we go. So now, when I'm ready, File, Export, Save for Web. You can do whatever you want to. You can invoke all those changes, use the controls, do the resize, everything we talked about. When you're all done, I got a couple things open here. There we go. When you're all done, you hit Save, and you close this, and you hit Save. Here's the coolest thing. Flip back over to Lightroom, and once Photoshop finishes saving the image, it will toss it back into your Lightroom library and keep it organized. So now that Photoshop file is back in, or that TIFF file, and you can do whatever you need to in Lightroom. But you got that great control over that expanded Save for Web dialog box right inside of Photoshop if you need it. So this gives you that ability to jump back and forth. All right. I think that works pretty well. I want to switch to some technology for sharing your images online. Let me just see if there's any other questions. Looks like you guys are doing pretty well here, so I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. And let me just flip over to a web browser here for a second. And Tom, if you want to unmute your microphone, feel free. I just wanted to mention the ASMP's Find a Photographer service. So if you're an ASMP member, you have access to be listed in this. And if you are not an ASMP member, this is one of the main benefits of ASMP membership. It makes it very easy for people to find you and to connect with you. Is there anything you want to share about the service, Tom?
Yeah, I just would want to say, Rich, that this is one of the areas of particular focus with the new website, that we're going to be hugely cleaning up the interface at the outset, and we'll be adding features to it over time that will enable photographers to do a more effective job of representing what they're really interested in terms of searching out for, to attract the attention of clients. So eventually they'll be able to write up a profile of themselves, talk a little bit about the clients that they're working with and some of the areas of interest that they have that would be beneficial for clients to know. So I think that you're going to see a substantial change over time from what you're viewing currently, and that's all part of our effort, as I said earlier, and why I was so excited to be talking with you, Rich, and appreciate your support with respect to what you're doing today and in an ongoing basis with Piqsure, because I just think that we're really looking to make the site as strong as possible for enabling photographers to really connect well with clients.
Thank you, Tom. And that's very helpful, and I'm excited about those changes. I'd like to mention what Piqsure is so you guys understand it. So Piqsure came out of a, let's just be honest, a science project, essentially. A couple of colleagues of mine in the Washington, D.C. area, and then later around the world, got together and started wondering about why images had to look so bad online. We've just seen that things have been falling apart. So we decided to go in and really sort of change the way that images work online. So the goal is you upload any size image that you want. You can put up any type of format, and you upload it in a web browser. After it's uploaded, we then process the image, much like how you could put a high-definition video up to Vimeo or YouTube. Then the images can be shared and embedded, and you get a whole library to control things, which works pretty well. Now, ASMP members are going to be getting access to this, but we do have a beta program that will start later in the year. So that's the URL, but I want to show you what this looks like and how it comes into play. I'll put that URL up there at the end. So here's what happens. So one person that's a colleague of mine that I like is a digital artist named Bert Monroy, and he's been using our technology for a while. And Bert is a photorealistic painter. So I actually have this image in my lobby at my office. It's an image here of Chicago, and if you don't know Bert's work, you might not think that this is a painting, but there's no photographs in this. Well, we'll talk about photograph examples in just a second, but Bert was one of those test cases. So, you know, this file flattened is 1.7 gigabytes. It's a 40 by 120 inch print. Let me hit reload. We just loaded the full quality file. Now, here's what I mean by that. Right now, we only need this much of the image, but we can continue to click and drill into the image, and as we drill in, it loads exactly what's needed to show that quality. So if you're concerned about clients being able to truly appreciate your work or stand out from the crowd of people who don't have tack sharp photos, well, we've built that in. And so now you can see that Bert has painted the inside of every one of those windows, which is just amazing that he's done that level of work. But you don't have to wait for the whole image to download. It just loads what you call up. You'll also notice there's that persistent watermark idea we talked about. And as his images move around the web, you can know about the image, know about the artist, and always get in touch with him, whether you want to buy the image, send him an email, visit his website, or connect with him. And so we've built in these sorts of things. So as people share, it becomes possible that commerce links, as well as the artist information and all of the metadata, travels with the image wherever it goes. So let me show you what this looks like. So here's my portfolio, and if I want to upload an image, it's pretty simple. So I've logged in, I can build out my profile, load in my email address, my Twitter information, Facebook, Google, my website, anything that is relevant to my audience. And then what happens is I just upload a photo. So I can grab any high quality file. Now, we recommend saving them as JPEG at 100 quality because that's going to give you lossless information and a reasonable upload. But you can upload whatever you want. There will be some limits depending upon the size of your membership and what you'll be able to do. But you just click on a file and choose it, and then it will upload in the background. Then, once it hits the servers, it will be processed. And it's cut up into lots of pieces, so we're not actually ever serving up one file. What we've done is we have a high-quality file. Now, once it finishes, you'll get an email, and we just send you an email saying that that image has been converted, and we give you a link right to it. It will also pop up into your library when it's done, and you'll see here that you get an entire catalog so you can easily manage all of your portfolio images. When you click on an image, you can decide how that image is going to display. So, for example, if I want somebody to know about this image, I can give it a title. I can give it a caption. I can assign a copyright statement. I can do all of these things that are important to me. I can give it everything that's necessary. So let's do that image that I just uploaded. So in this case, it's an image for a hospital. I won't give away any vital information, but I'll say hospital interior panorama. And because it's a panorama image, I want people to be able to zoom in. I do want a copyright. I do maybe want more information, so I can enter a URL. I don't want people to be able to download it, but that is your choice. And I can set if I want it to just be full screen. Maybe you don't want magnification. Full screen means show them a full screen image on any device. So if they access on a 4K monitor, they get a 4K image. If they access on their smartphone, they get a smartphone image, but they can never zoom in. If you want them to magnify, then you are in control, and you can turn that on. When you click Save, that will update. So now what that then gives you the benefit is that the images are in your gallery. And so if someone were to come and look at that image and they wanted to see it, or I sent them the link to it, what's going to happen is that that image will load. So there's the panoramic image. You'll notice that there's the title that I gave it. There's my contact information, so they can email me, visit my website. They can see the metadata about the image, so I can decide what metadata is going to be shown with that image. And I'll go back and show you that viewer in a second. And with every image, I've turned on a persistent watermark and a copyright statement. So one of the things that I've learned as an ASMP member is the importance of having that. But in this case, as the person explores and wants to take a look and judge the quality of my panoramic photography, the watermark stays put, but they can dig into the photo and interactively look at it like it was on the screen, giving them full control, but no ability to right-click and save, no ability to get access to the entire file. And as I had mentioned, under the metadata controls for an image, you have the ability for full control. You can decide which metadata is displayed. Now, when you upload, this was a merged panorama, so there was no metadata from the one file. But I can go to any other individual file that had been uploaded, and I'll see all the information. And on a field-by-field basis, you can decide what is displayed to people who visit. And we even have specific sets for different industries, like real estate, or special search terms to make your content easier to find online. So you create your own metadata fields as well as full IPTC compatible ones. And Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything about the orphan works concept, but this is something incredibly important to us, that as a creator, as your images move around, you don't lose track of the copyright of the creator and that that information is preserved with it. That was critically important to us, because I also know it's critically important to ASMP's view about images online.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the single biggest challenges that we've been confronting as an organization, and in particular, the ability of certain social media sites to strip out metadata as a part of their process when they're presenting images for sharing. So, this is one of the things when we first started talking that I felt was really particularly attractive about what you were doing.
We want to make sure that we have full support for all metadata, all copyright information, and everything else. So as you share your images, you can share full quality photos if you want, or if you don't want, you just upload whatever quality you want, but that information will travel. You don't need to watermark in advance, but you do need to do the things we talked about, color space and sharpening, and just make a high quality JPEG, and that stuff will move around. I do want to show you a sneak peek of what's coming. Let me just put this to the side really quick, and I got one other thing to show you. We have been doing some extra work here on improving the user interface, and I think you'll like this. So what we've done here is we're making it a little more modern, so this is coming soon, and you'll have the ability to not just have a bio, but to have an individual artist statement about the individual image, so you can tell people about the photo and have an artist statement. So we're going to have two descriptive fields, which will be nice. And as a potential collaboration tool, this will be rolling out later in this year, but we'll have this available for certain accounts. You'll have the ability for people to collaborate. So if you were not using this as part of a portfolio, but rather as part of the review process, you actually can turn on commenting, which we have here. And so people would be able to log in to the account, add a comment, edit it, put in information, change the shape or the markup symbol, add the color if that's useful, if you use color coding, and put notes in, and then you'll be able to see very accurate comments. So if I wanted to zoom in and really tell what somebody was talking about there, I could actually go right into a point and take a look at pixel level feedback, and I can see that comment there that in this case he wanted me to make sure that I was getting rid of that blemish, and I can just view what he had written there about that particular comment. So that'll make it easy to see what's on somebody's mind as you're working or collaborating. So he wants me to remove this part of the image. Now, we envision that in the future, there'll be more and more options to start to collaborate online in an environment. But today, the biggest thing we're trying to do is to make sure that you can collaborate. And for me, this has become a necessity. I do a lot of panoramic photography as part of my workflow, and the truth of the matter is that seeing a panorama like this on a computer, it's just not any fun. You can't have any appreciation. This could have been shot on a friggin' iPhone. I want people to be able to appreciate the levels of detail and to go into an image and really enjoy or be there, to explore things in depth, to get the full quality experience just like you would in a print environment, but to transfer that to an online experience. While at the same time, I never want to see my image traveling around the web without my contact information as a photographer, with the ability to get in touch with me, to learn about me, to connect with me socially, or to engage with me for commerce. And so we'll give you the ability to have sales to your website or to let people get in touch with you more and more. So this is a sneak peek of where we're going. Tom, if you want to talk a little bit more about the partnership, or Walter, I'll let you guys dig in and we'll answer some questions. But this technology is going to be rolled out to ASMP members here shortly. And if you are not an ASMP member, some of you are watching this as guests today, feel free to take a look here at this URL, Piqsure.com, sign up beta testers new. And we will have early access for a handful of people who are willing to participate in the beta program and give us some feedback. Tom, anything you want to add about rollout to members or any of your thoughts?
Well, just that we're going to be working to utilize it strategically across the site to give members a flavor of why, you know, as I said earlier, that I perceive this as a really valuable new way of presenting things. And we'll be, as we develop the website further, we'll obviously always be looking for feedback about, you know, various aspects, including this. So, you know, I just would say stay tuned, and I'm, you know, really pleased that you're offering this and making available the ability for ASMP members to develop portfolios, you know, in the way that we talked about, you know, and I realize that's still a ways off for everybody, but, you know, this is the direction, you know, one area that we're headed to collaborate on.
Good, good. And the reason why we did this, folks, is, I'll be perfectly honest, as an ASMP member, I've gotten a lot through ASMP through the years. I found the education about protecting images and business sense to be very helpful in my own business, so I wanted to make sure that the folks at ASMP had access to this, so we're giving them first access because it's a great organization and we hope that this helps you guys as photographers. My name's Rich Harrington. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm the publisher of Photo Focus as well, so you're welcome to check out an educational resource site there, and feel free to dig in a little bit more. But I appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you got some new ideas on how to prepare your images so they look their best online. And I really appreciate you guys taking the last hour to watch this. I hope it's helpful. Thank you so much for tuning in.